Welcome back, beautiful and amazing human beings. This is Rukadowski of WeAreChange.org here in Paris, France, where I just arrived to cover the Yellow Vest movement. I'm talking to a local here, and holy cow, the information that I'm getting here is extremely important, and of course, information that you're not going to get anywhere else, because I haven't heard it anywhere else. I haven't heard it on alternative media. I definitely heard it, didn't hear it on mainstream media, and there's so much more to this bigger movement that's happening here. And to talk about this, I have someone who's going to remain anonymous in this interview, mainly because he doesn't want to speak for this entire movement, and mainly because it is becoming also a very violent situation here, a very turbulent situation. I'm just going to call you Bob, if that's okay, and keep you out of the camera frame, but there's so much information and there's so much disinformation. But first of all, let's just get into how this all started, because a lot of people think this is just about a tax on gas. It's not. A lot of news media is criticizing, saying that Facebook is causing all these violence, and it was the main proponent behind this protest. And it's interesting that they're saying this now in the mainstream media, when in 2011 they were cheering it on when it was happening in the Middle East. But there's so much disinformation about the start of it. How did you personally yourself see things unfold here, attending the 3 weeks of the Yellow Vest protest?
Well, it started around about 2 months ago. What happened really is that, yes, it was about the tax on cars and fuel, but it was just a tipping point of something much bigger. And essentially everything that happened during the Macron's government since the beginning, but it's not about Macron, it's about 40 years of destruction of the public domain, the banking sector taking over the country, and people are feeling it not just in their wallets, but they are feeling it in their neighborhoods, their grandmother, their sisters, their baker. Everyone is talking about it since many years. What really triggered all of this is, first of all, Macron's rhetoric, because he has really a way of talking which is extremely aggressive towards people who are working, who are fed up with having to cross the red line on the bank account every second month and not being able to pay for simple things like for their children for Christmas. But I think we are getting to a laser effect, which is everything is coming together in a single point, and it's not about right wing with antifas and whatever getting into violent games. It's much bigger. Like, I've seen people throwing rocks at policemen. You would never expect this kind of people to do this in their life. It's because they are really getting insulted on a daily basis for what they're doing. And now I guess they have crossed the line, and this line will never get back. Never.
I mean, you were just telling me about some of your living situations. We can just move over here to the curb. And the amount that you have to pay each month just for rent, the amount you earn, just absolutely insane. And how people here are pretty much living and trying to earn money to not only raise kids but also take care of their parents, because their older parents are having a hard time surviving as well.
It can be both. It can be or parents taking care of their children after 40 years old. It can be the opposite, when they are getting paid for their retirements, which is below the level of poverty. I mean, you can imagine when you are getting a retirement which is below the level of poverty, you're throwing people into poverty legally, which is the reason why people are getting really fed up.
Yep. And there's a lot of important aspects to understand here behind this story, because a lot of these protests are from people coming from outside of Paris. A lot of these protests are, again, not left-wing, not right-wing, a convergence. There are nationalists here, there are Antifa part of the protest, but there is a kind of bigger movement, and there's been a lot of people selecting what they like and what they don't like about this movement. But the information is being smeared by the mainstream media. It's being spread by the alternative media, hand-picked, selected what people like and goes along with their political ideology. But what do you think are some of the bigger kind of truths here that people need to understand here? Because this movement definitely doesn't look like it's going away. It definitely looks like it's going to be bigger and way more insane tomorrow, which of course we're going to be covering live on this YouTube channel live. The make sure you're subscribed and click the notification for. And people are also expecting it to get a lot more violent. I mean, you were even telling me that they found anti-tank, like weaponry, missiles here. You were telling me that there was an acid attack on a police officer here as well. I never heard of any of those things. What are some of the bigger truths that people should understand about this movement?
Well, it's a movement that hopefully will take a greater, that will reach the world basically, because it's not about the French population. I can imagine it's basically everywhere in Europe. It's basically also in the United States. We can do it very differently, but people have to stop looking at TV and stop thinking that the revolution will come one day. It's now, first of all, and they have to also think about what can we think through in terms of solution right now and not tomorrow, in order to get to make sure that the banking system is not going to contract the nation states, because I guess the crisis is going to get bigger by the next months. We've seen it very just the past days, and what I personally, from my opinion, expect in the next days is that France will be different in about 2 weeks. A different government, a different situation. My fear is that the violence will be used in order to push for martial laws. But the military here in France, I think they will never accept it. They don't want to go after their own people. Even the policemen, they're getting really tired of being thrown into these violent games that, these are people, normal people. They know why it's happening, because they also feel it in their own life. They are not getting paid. They are not getting their dignity. So I think it's a trigger. It can be very, very global and very short time period, but it has to be clear. The real enemy is not the politicians as such. It's really what's controlling them. People here in France are starting to say it out loud on TV, with millions of people looking at TV, which is very new. There was a huge censorship, and now it's getting out that Macron is not the main controller of his own population. He receives order from outside, and people kind of knew it, but now it's being said. It's being said out loud, which is very new, very something totally new, and people are starting to be like this microphone. I wouldn't have had it if it wasn't happening. It's the same for millions of people who have been receiving calls by journalists and whatnot, and they're asking them why. So people are now being called to explain what they have in their hearts, which is exactly what they didn't want to. And that's exactly why the yellow vest started. It started because the color yellow, it's like, if you want to be heard, if you want to be seen in the streets, then you take yellow. That's the way they said it. So they started with this on Facebook. There was a few persons who started it. It's very difficult to understand what happened. If Facebook pushed some of these guys, we can't say for sure. There could be a different agenda in some way, but my view is that it had to happen anyway. Whatever people are saying, it had to happen. It's not really controlled. It's completely organic. It's totally new for the people who are in power right now. They didn't expect anything of this to happen.
I didn't expect it to happen. I mean, I was here when people were, cheering on for Macron when he was elected. And again, a lot of, you can just feel it. Like the people I talk to just arriving here, the people leaving here, the people in the taxis, the people in the streets, the few that I talk to here, they're feeling something major is happening here. The Yellow Vest movement has 80% support amongst the people. And it truly looks like this will be, and it feels like this will lead to the ouster of at least Macron and even bigger political changes. And it looks like it's definitely going to get a lot more turbulent before it gets calmer here in Paris, France. And just like we've seen, I mean, we've seen that footage of the police officers taking off their helmets, and you even explained to me that it wasn't just police officers walking up to the protesters saying, "We'll join you." It was police officers involved in a kettle who took off their helmet in agreement for peace between the protesters, so the protesters would walk away and the police officers showed them that they wouldn't hurt them or beat them up, because a lot of the violence has been initiated by the state here, which needs to be understood. A lot of the violence has been started because of the tear gas. And Bob, thank you so much for sitting me. Anything else you want to say about this specific issue? If not, we could just go on. But you just gave me a full download on a lot of information.
No, I just want to say that looking at what's this event unfolding from the United States, I was looking to many videos. What I can say is don't go for wishful thinking and go more for your taking time to look behind things, because it's very clear that that's what they want from us. They want us to actually go for wishful thinking. So in the end of the line, we are divided because we are not clear on what really is happening, and we're not also basically looking for history, the real history of these events.
Excellent answer. Question everything. I'm going to call you Bob, just for clarity reasons, security reasons again, and also the other reasons. And I wanted to thank you guys so much from the bottom of my heart for watching, being a part of this journey with me. Stay tuned, especially tomorrow, as we're going to be documenting this important historic event live here on the ground in Paris, France. Love you guys. Thank you again so much for watching and financing and fundraising and making this possible. Thank you.
The UN conference in Marrakesh, Morocco ended earlier today, and Louise Arbour, the Secretary General of the conference, ended the event by saying that borders are just lines drawn on paper, and this compact will help reduce the profound inequities of the lottery of birth. And what was being touted as a non-binding gesture of goodwill Sunday evening was already de facto international law by Tuesday afternoon. In fact, the United Nations is already talking about a 4-year checkup starting in 2022 to see which countries are implementing the policies and which countries are not.
From the front lines of the culture war, this is Renaissance Horizon.
Monday morning, 164 UN members adopted the UN Global Compact on Migration. If you don't know what that is, please see my original video on the topic. I'll post a link in the description. 29 countries did not. Now, the UN said Monday morning that they would post a list. They never did. They said this morning, again, they were going to post a list. They still haven't posted any list. The next event concerning this is December 19th, where the UN General Assembly is going to officially make this a formal UN document. And in the case of New Zealand, they had representatives at the conference, but they did not adopt it. But the Prime Minister of New Zealand says that the government is still deciding and that they'll wait till the UN General Assembly meeting to make their official decision. Now, in the case of Slovenia, apparently the government of Slovenia reneged in late November, and the media just continued to report that they weren't signing, and many media outlets are still reporting right now that they didn't sign, even though they did. In the case of Croatia, the president of Croatia said in early November that she was canceling her trip to Morocco. She didn't know what she was agreeing to. She wasn't going to sign it. And then she quietly sent someone else in her place and signed it. There was outrage on the floor of the Croatian parliament Monday morning. Even the Croatian Socialist Party, which supported the compact, conceded that this was done inappropriately and there should have been a vote. So the Croatian signature, like several other countries such as Norway, Denmark, and Belgium, are all tainted and lacking the proper authority. Now, here's where it gets interesting. Brazil adopted it Monday morning, and then Tuesday morning, the incoming administration of Bolsonaro announced that they will be pulling out as soon as they gain power in January. Now, there's a bunch of other interesting tidbits. The Russian mission to the UN issued an official statement denouncing parts of the compact, explicitly saying that Russia was not going to abide by it, yet they signed it anyway. Why they signed it, I have no idea. So at the conference, there was all kinds of speeches, all kinds of panels. There was 25 heads of state. The only person I know of that said anything intelligent was the foreign minister of Lebanon. And he got up and briefly spoke about how Lebanon is struggling to deal with all their Palestinians and all their Syrian war refugees, and that the UN should be focused on the safe and dignified return of Syrians back to their homes in Syria, and not concerned with granting rights and privileges to economic migrants. And he challenged the fantasy view of immigrants that was being expressed by other people at the conference, and said that mass migration, quotes, destroys and degrades nations. And he said that there's parts of the compact that Lebanon is not going to abide by. But as far as I can tell, Lebanon did sign it. I'm not 100% sure because I don't speak Arabic, but I'm 90% sure that Lebanon signed. As far as the Orient goes, a bunch of people were saying that a lot of countries in the Orient were not going to sign. The only thing I know for sure is Japan signed. As far as Saudi Arabia and the Gulf states, I know that Qatar signed. I don't know about any of the others. In Southeastern Europe, I can now say that Malta, Macedonia, Serbia, Romania, all signed. As far as the little tiny states in Europe, Luxembourg, Monaco, San Marino, all signed. I don't know about Andorra and Liechtenstein. I read the statement that the San Marino mission to the UN published. It was one of the most cartoonishly hypocritical things I've ever read. If you don't know what San Marino is, it's a little tiny, all-white, all-Catholic ethno-state in the northeast of Italy with about 33,000 citizens, and no one else is allowed in. When I read San Marino's statement, what popped into my mind is that the government of Italy should take about 100 school buses, load them up with illegal aliens, drive into the middle of San Marino and dump them off. And say, you agreed to it, because that's what's going on in the media right now. It's soft law, baby. It's you agreed to it. You got to implement this now. MSF, Amnesty International, a bunch of the other far-left NGOs, they're all over the media saying, oh, we're concerned that some countries adopted this but won't implement all of it. Oh, how inconvenient. It's already being used as ammunition to try to stop deportations in Europe. All the criticisms that were being said about this were already coming true earlier today before the conference even ended. Okay, to sum things up, 29 countries did not sign. However, some of those probably will sign over the course of the next week. However, there's other countries that I believe will be withdrawing from it over the course of the next year. So this is going to be continuously changing. All right, thanks for watching this video. Please subscribe to my YouTube channel. Please post a comment and click the like button. New video every few days.
This morning I had a revelation, and some ingredients that sort of sit in the back of my head all of a sudden came together. And I want to share that with you this morning. It has to do with the UN Global Compact on Migration and what I think is the real purpose of it. There were three things, three individual pieces that all gelled this morning. And the first has to do with something we talked about yesterday. So I just want to refresh everybody's memories as well as mine. It was this bureaucratic theory by Max Weber. Now, he talked about how bureaucratic organization is the premier organization to control human beings, and that essentially it is a legal framework. It's based on rules and policies and laws. And the key part that I didn't pay much attention to yesterday but want to point out now is this. All aspects of a democracy are organized on the basis of rules and laws, making the principle of established jurisdiction prevail. making the principle of established jurisdiction prevail. In other words, you can't enforce laws or rules somewhere that you haven't established your right to do so. Jurisdiction, we know what that means. So my argument yesterday was that this is the way international and supranational organizations such as the UN and the EU are colonizing the rest of the world through bureaucratic legal frameworks, mostly treaties. And then from there springs forth all these mini bureaucracies and policy enforcement arms and also all the attendant things like NGOs, which are basically modern day lobbying groups, etc. So that was in my head. And then this morning I'm just looking at various news items, and actually someone from the Rebel Media, Ezra Levant, the owner of the Rebel Media, posted an excerpt from the Global Compact on Migration. He posted this highlighted paragraph. So I read this. The compact, anybody signs the compact is agreeing to these parameters and many more, but this is the one we're going to concentrate on. The focus here should be on what the nations are obligated to provide to the migrants. Legal guidance on their rights and access to justice to file complaints about rights violations, as well as on access to basic services. And the rights are laid out throughout the whole rest of this document. And there's lots of them. There's some right in this paragraph. Really vague things like targeted, gender-responsive, child-sensitive, accessible, and comprehensive information. All of those phrases are way open for interpretation. And the UN is asking countries to sign on to an agreement where we will be obliged to play by those rules. In other words, they're establishing jurisdiction, right? But here's where it really gelled for me. Watch this little, I've cut out a tiny piece of Marine Le Pen's press conference that she held yesterday.
Le 10 et le 11 décembre, M. Macron s'apprête à signer à Marrakech le pacte mondial pour les migrations sûres, ordonnées et régulières. Avec cette nouvelle trahison silencieuse de la nation, nos dirigeants franchissent une nouvelle étape dans la submersion organisée de notre pays. Ces promoteurs, mus par une idéologie mondialiste assumée, se fixent pour vaine ambition de rendre les migrations bénéfiques à tous. Au même titre que le droit international reconnaît le statut protecteur aux 25 millions de réfugiés, les immigrationnistes entendent désormais offrir un statut aux 225 millions de migrants dont les parcours seront désormais promus, organisés et protégés par le droit international.
Just the way she said that made me realize something. Each migrant is basically a citizen of the United Nations now, because the United Nations is the entity that's granting these people their rights. In other words, put another way, each migrant, each individual migrant is a moving, portable jurisdiction. And who gave them that jurisdiction? Who owns that jurisdiction? The UN. Each migrant is basically like the UN flag being planted in our countries. So however many we take, that's however much jurisdiction the United Nations has. I don't think I'm far off. What I'm imagining in my head, first of all, is the concept of lawfare. Imagine how overwhelmed our systems are going to be when we have to provide access to legal services for any challenge of any of these vaguely worded rights that the United Nations is giving them, which are separate from the rights that the regular full citizens of those nations have. They're separate. They're completely different. Basically, these people are citizens of the United Nations and their idea of rights. And the United Nations, keep in mind, exists solely to churn its policies and bureaucracy. That's all it does. It doesn't have to provide health care for its citizens. It doesn't have to provide education or clean the roads or national defense or any of the things that government does in our nations are going to disadvantage us against the United Nations in any legal battle, because all the United Nations does all day, every day, is engage in legal battles. So they are sending these migrants all around the world into the democracies that they want to subvert. If you look at it, that's where they're targeting. So many resources are going to go towards providing legal services in all these various languages to all these various migrants and try to bend over backwards to their cultural traditions. We have to learn all the ways of these new citizens of the United Nations that are coming into our countries. International law is new.
These have been created over the years. Some of them date back to the 19th century, but for the most part, that's a kind of 20th century phenomenon. So one of the things we see in the last century or so has been, one, the rise of these international organizations, the UN being the paramount example, and two, the use of treaties. Treaties existed in the past, but when we talked about custom and common law, that was much more common. Now we tend to codify that in a treaty. So those two things are sort of two major trends of the last century.
It was in the last 100 years, and even the last half century for the most part, that this proliferation of treaties and supranational bodies has come into being. Really, international law was something that was settled between two countries by just cutting off trade with one another. Or sometimes some wars happened between two countries over violations. But how can the UN enforce anybody's rights from their perch far away based on some piece of paper that we all signed? How can they do that? The truth is that's a major stumbling block for their colonization. At any time, countries can just pull out of different treaties, refuse to acknowledge the jurisdiction of the WTO or the Security Council or the International Criminal Court. And the U.S. has done that. This is why they hate Donald Trump. He's pulling out of agreements and treaties and refusing to acquiesce to this jurisdiction of the supranational bodies all over the place. So they hate him for that. They hate all the populists for the same reason. They're doing that. They're saying, I don't want to be part of your agreement anymore. So the UN sees the facade, this magic spell that it had cast over us, where we all agreed and therefore, oh my God, there's nothing we can do. We made this agreement and we have to stick to it even if it hurts us. That magic spell is breaking. And so what they're trying to do is put literal pieces of their territory inside our territory, which will be much, much harder for us to refuse to deal with because there they are in front of us. In the end, what I think this is leading to is for all of us that sign on to this treaty and have these migrants in our countries where we're bound by these rights that were given to them by the UN. I think the UN is going to make the claim that there's only one possible way to settle disputes about these rights, which is to go to a UN court, a human rights or migrant rights or citizen rights, world citizen rights court, something like that, something Orwellian like that. And it will only apply to people who aren't actually citizens of the countries in which they're making the claims. And by that mechanism, with the chaos it will cause, the resource draining that it will cause, the community breakdown that it will cause, I believe the UN is seeking to further entrench its attempt to colonize all of us via international treaties. I'm going to stop talking now. Thanks a lot for listening to this brand new idea that came into my head today. I apologize if it wasn't fully formed, but I hope you got something out of it. I hope this can give you a new frame with which to talk about this very important issue. Our democracies are being subverted, and it is planned and organized. We are not going to be able to deal with the chaos storm and the lawfare that results from this We need to stay out of this pact. In fact, I'll talk about it in subsequent videos, but we really need to stay out of... We need to get out of treaties that we're already a part of before the UN and the EU do build a world army, and then there'll be no way of getting out peacefully. Okay, really stopping talking now. Zip. I'll talk to you soon. Thumbs up, subscribe, leave a comment. Peace out.
Your time is up, white people. So declared an economic freedom fighter MP of the South African Parliament, according to local reports upon news that the seizure of white South African land without compensation will go ahead in March 2019. Any criticism of the redistribution of land to black South Africans, including criticisms given by US President Donald Trump, is dismissed as racist by South Africa's President Cyril Ramaphosa. And all of this is taking place in the shadow of some white South African farmers calling for an independent nation for their people, mostly white Afrikaners, as they believe that their way of life is now at risk. On the 8th of December, the South African National Assembly, by a margin of 183 to 77, approved a proposal that will change the country's constitution and will allow it to confiscate land owned by white South Africans and redistribute it to black South Africans without compensation. That is, farmers in South Africa will have their land taken away from them without any monetary compensation because of the color of their skin being white, and it will be given to other South Africans because their skin color is black. With the approval of the change in constitution to allow the land grabs against white farmers, the nation's lawmakers are now in the process of setting up a committee that will help draw up a bill to carry out the expropriation without compensation. Critics have said the move could cripple the nation's economy in a similar way to that of Zimbabwe, that also expropriated white-owned farms, and it plunged the country into chaos and hyperinflation, and in the end to the status of that of a failed state in a very short amount of time. However, according to many of the members of the African National Congress, as well as the Marxist-leaning Economic Freedom Fighters Party, headed by one Julius Malema, who has previously stated that we have not called for the killing of white people, at least for now. He also said that he could not guarantee what would happen in the future.
I don't know what's going to happen in the future. I'm saying to you, we've not called for the killing of white people, at least for now. I can't guarantee the future.
Yeah, but I mean, you'd understand somebody watching that, especially as it gets shared on Twitter, they freak out. It sounds like a genocidal call.
Cry babies. Cry babies.
I'm not calling for the slaughter of white people, at least for now.
I can't give a guarantee of the future.
Many of the members of the government say that this is the only way to address the wealth gap between black and white South Africans, while other members of the government have said the move undermines South Africa's position as a democratic state and that this was a populist agenda being implemented by the ruling party. For his part, US President Donald Trump has been a vocal critic of the plan. And in response, Ramaphosa has brushed off all concerns that people have in a recent anti-Trump tirade that any critics to the land grab against white farmers are racist. What is clear is that this is a purely racist action. It is quite literally the theft from some South Africans who happen to have white skin of their property and is being handed over to other people with black skin who also happen to be South African. It is explicitly racist. I am of the opinion, however, that this is not only an issue of race, but an expression of the deeply rooted Marxist ideology of radical social justice manifest in South Africa. This ideology has seen its tentacles seep into everything from Hollywood to robotic brothels, and across oceans from Australasia and Europe all the way down to South Africa. This legalized theft in South Africa is predicated on increasing the wealth of blacks so as to make them equally wealthy as whites economically, and this is what its backers espouse. However, such a radical action would never have taken place even 10 short years ago in South Africa, nor would it be accepted as anything other than what it is, deeply racist by the global community. The difference is, as stated, the increasing power of radical Marxist social justice ideology, especially in media and academia. The idea of radical equality is what is being proposed. The vast majority of blacks are no worse off economically than they were under apartheid. Indeed, there is absolutely no institutional discrimination against blacks in South Africa today. In fact, the majority is on the receiving end of many laws that govern affirmative action in employment contracts and in business. What radical social justice, when applied to South Africa in the populist manner as predicated by the ANC and the EEF, is not to make blacks wealthier, but to make whites equally poor. In fact, the massive growth in poverty of working-class whites, mostly Afrikaners, in South Africa has led to the surge in white squatter townships across the country. And there are no laws to help them, only laws that discriminate against them because of the color of their skin. This is the result of affirmative action laws that discriminate against the white minority in favor of the black majority, and have made it difficult for whites to secure work as the laws are aimed at providing blacks a greater share of the economy. Still, even with the massive growth in poverty and many whites now living in shanty towns and in squalor, any suggestion that whites are suffering as a group has, according to The Independent, been met with an angry backlash among black South Africans as they believe not all whites are as poor as blacks. Not yet, it would seem in their minds, is there equality in failure, poverty, and misery. And this is the key takeaway. Social justice is never about equality of opportunity, but equality of outcome. And South Africa has become very infected with this ideology in almost everything, including academia, where it is now being pushed to what is called decolonize academia, or to eliminate the legacy of European thought and culture in education. The science departments have struggled to explain how this can be accomplished, but they suggest not only an increase in black scientists, but of what they call a racial transformation. Like in Zimbabwe, Marxist jingoism about equality is about creating the circumstances where everyone is equal. If that means being equally poor, so be it, as it usually does. Just look at Venezuela. South Africa, under these conditions, is setting itself up to be just another failed sub-Saharan nation with a kleptocracy that works in favor of a small minority at the top of the economic food chain, with little in the way of concern for the teeming masses below. The situation currently has become so intolerable for many people in the country that there are now calls by many white South African farmers for an independent homeland where they can be free to create their own destiny. These calls have been spurred on by not only the impending theft of their land by the government, but also the appalling, vicious, and brutal murders of scores of farmers across the country. On that note, Valerie Bleifeld, a provincial leader of the National Conservative Party, has said on a Facebook video that she wanted Donald Trump to intervene on behalf of white farmers in South Africa. She also said that white farmers were not only the victims of the crisis, but that black farmers and farm workers were also being targeted. The leader of the NCP, Willie Khaledi, also said that he wanted an independent country for white Afrikaners, as he believes that their way of life was at risk. We want to get out of the unity state. We want to have a state of our own. We want independence, he said. He added, we want self-determination implemented in South Africa, and we as the NCP are currently leading the way towards self-determination for our people in a legal way. And it is of note that 2018 marks the second year of Black Monday protests that are held to raise awareness about the murders of white farmers in South Africa. Given the divisive nature of the looming appropriation of white-owned land without compensation, I wish the nation well. The success of any sub-Saharan nation is critical in changing the dynamics in what is perhaps the most dysfunctional region on the planet. I fear, however, should this legalized theft of minority citizens' property for the benefit of the majority go ahead, which it looks almost certain that it will, the ramifications could be extreme. Social justice-driven Marxism has a track record of failure. Zimbabwe is a very good example of what the probable outcome for South Africa will be after it follows this course of action. Everything from there on in will be subject to uncertainty, bank loans, investment, contracts. Everything is tied back to property rights, and without clearly defined property rights, all South Africans, both black and white, at least the majority of which, are most likely going to suffer, and suffer greatly. Also to consider is that this discriminatory redistribution of property could also be the foreshadowing of how other white populations could be treated as they too become minorities in their own countries. Radical calls for social justice in Canada, Australia, Sweden, the UK, and the confiscation of property without compensation, or calls for affirmative action politics for the majority, are all easily implemented once the demographics of a democratic nation changes. That's why what is happening in South Africa today and the now legalized theft of one group of people's property based on their skin color should concern everyone, no matter what race, color, or creed you are. Thanks for watching. If you liked this material, please consider subscribing. Also follow Black Pigeon on the usual social media. Till next time.